Thank you so much, Jim. So great to be here today with everybody. Just really quickly about Formation. Our mission is to bring better treatments to patients faster and more effectively. And, you know, our story actually has its roots here in Pittsburgh, as Jim was saying. We came here in 2014 to join the Alpha Lab summer cohort. And if this was a typical biotech story, right, we'd be out in the Bay Area, there'd be a photo of a garage someplace in the valley. Instead, we have our co-founders assembling IKEA furniture in an East Liberty apartment. One-bedroom apartment, they had 4 people living in there and working in there while they were launching the company, but you know, so much thanks to Alpha Labs and their support as we're getting things off the ground. A lot's changed over the last 10 years. We've built a tech-native pharma company where we acquire clinical stage drugs. These are drugs that are ready for their human trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And we develop those drugs in-house on a tech and operations platform that allows us to develop those drugs meaningfully more efficiently and faster than industry benchmarks. Before I dive into a little bit about Formation Bio and how we scaled the company from 2014 through today, and a little bit about where we're going in the future, I want to touch a little bit on just the problem that we're working to solve. And that's if you're a patient who is waiting for a new drug to come out, right? You've read an interesting article in Nature, you have a chronic condition, maybe you have a terminal condition, and there's a newly discovered drug that may be able to save your life or allow you to have a meaningfully better life. Unfortunately, it's going to cost around $2.6 billion on a risk-adjusted basis and take 10 to 12 years for that drug to make it through clinical trials until it's able to benefit you as a patient. Unfortunately, these numbers are moving in the wrong direction. Starting in around the 1980s, the cost of bringing a drug to market on a risk-adjusted basis around $70 million. It's $2.6 billion today. I think we're all familiar with Moore's Law, right? The number of transistors in a microchip doubles roughly every 18 months, corresponding increase in compute power, decrease in cost. In healthcare, we unfortunately sometimes refer to this as EROM's law, which is Moore's Law backwards, because the numbers are going the opposite direction here. More expensive, slower processes. And you know, when you look at drug development as a whole, right, you know, a drug gets discovered in a laboratory, there's work that's done at that lab to determine whether or not we should take into clinical trials, and that takes about 1.5 years. Clinical trials take 10 to 12 years, and then you'll have around 8 to 13 years of an exclusive sales period before you lose your patent protection and generics come into the market. So there's a lot of time pressure here. The costs of running those clinical trials, anywhere from the mid-hundreds of millions to the billions, depending on the complexity of the drug. And only 1 out of every 10 drugs that enters phase 1 clinical trials makes it through to FDA approval. The industry itself has been remarkably efficient in discovering new drug candidates. It's somewhere where technology has had a huge impact. AI in the form of NLP and machine learning has been deployed for years now. The industry is capable of discovering lots of drugs, and you have this choke point, which are the clinical trials, right? Very high cost, very long timelines. And if you're a pharma company, you can only spend so much money on discovery because you have to spend so much money on clinical trials. And take Novartis, for example, they spend around $9 billion a year on R&D. $2 billion of that's on discovery, the remaining is $7 billion of that is spent on clinical trials. And so if you're a pharma company or a biotech, you have to be ruthless in determining which drugs you move forward, because you have to be considerate of how much patent life is left, and if you're going to be able to get a return on investment for an asset where only 1 in 10 actually makes it all the way through. And as a result, there are incredible drugs sitting on the shelves of academic institutions, biotechs, and large pharma, which could benefit patients today, which unfortunately will never be developed because of the cost burdens associated with them. So why is it that we have you know, sort of a world where drug discovery is becoming more and more efficient, yet development is not? You know, starting in the 1980s in response to increased government regulation around clinical trials, the industry started to outsource its clinical trial work to what are known as contract research organizations, or CROs. And those CROs work on a cost-plus business model where they essentially charge for every hour of work that they do. And as clinical trials become more and more complex over time, with the emergence of more complex drugs, increased regulation, more data points being collected, the CRO industry hasn't kept up with that level of innovation, and so costs are going up and up as the amount of time that they're spending increases. And apologies, the colors are a little bit off here, but what we're looking at here is some of the complexity that has arisen as you're collecting more and more data points for every clinical trial. There's a corresponding increase in the amount of data that's moving around that trial. In a world where you've got lots of individual vendors, all of whom are deploying point solutions for collecting certain types of data in that clinical trial, all that data needs to be harmonized, it needs to be monitored, it needs to be cleaned, and every time data is moving from one database to another, it generates more billable hours for a CRO, and it generates more sort of overall cost for the overall process, such that around 2/3 of the costs of running a clinical trial are going to the CRO, and that CRO is appending a 50% margin to every billable hour that it invoices for. So this is a very knotty problem. Our co-founders were sitting in their one-bedroom apartment in East Liberty, thinking about how they were going to disrupt this and to be able to bring drugs to the market more efficiently. And we knew that you wouldn't be able to raise the capital necessary to disrupt the entire industry from a one-bedroom apartment in East Liberty. So we adopted more of a crawl, walk, run approach, where we took a look at sort of what were some of the lowest hanging fruit, which was increasing the cost of these trials, and worked to deploy tech and processes in order to be able to accelerate the processes and then also reduce the costs. And so taking a step back, we looked at, sort of what are the three major areas of clinical trials that we were looking to, sort of clinical trials are very complex, and they can be broken down effectively into three separate sections, right? Patient recruitment, which is finding the patients who are going to participate in the trial, managing the clinical trial sites where patients go to receive their treatment, and then all of the operational and data management workflows that go around that. So we started with patient recruitment. In 2014, recruiting for clinical trials was relatively kind of almost simplistic process, right? You put some pamphlets up in the clinical trial sites, you might send out some mailers to people in various databases. But because the industry was so fragmented and because you had all these various vendors doing different things, you couldn't deploy the types of funnel management techniques that you typically see in the consumer industry, right? You couldn't run social media marketing because you didn't really have a way of monitoring the pull-through of that spend into the clinics. You couldn't do A/B testing, UX optimization. You really didn't have a clear view of the funnel, so we went in, we built the technology and the processes to run a dynamic recruiting funnel. We showed that we were actually able to run run the recruitment for clinical trials around 2.5 times faster than standard industry benchmarks. And when 80% of clinical trials are delayed because of difficulties in recruiting patients, accelerating those the recruiting time frame has a meaningful impact on clinical trial timelines. And so what we did then was we started selling our services to large pharma and biotechs which are running trials, essentially becoming a CRO vendor ourselves, using that revenue, coupled with venture capital we were able to raise based off of the proof points we achieved through establishing our patient recruitment modules, to raise our Series A financing round. Using that revenue and the financing, we then went into clinical trial site management, where we were figuring out ways to be able to accelerate the startup of the trial at the clinical trial site, accelerate the readout of the data at the end, and then also optimize all the processes in the middle. Similarly, we were very successful there. We found that we could accelerate startup and closeout by 2 to 3 times industry benchmarks. We productized that, started offering that as well, generating more revenue, and based on our success there, we were able to raise our Series B, which then helped us finance build out of operational data more of the operational and data management side of the clinical trial process, which includes all of the things like safety, biostats, compliance, regulatory. Sort of at this point, we had reached a stage where by 2021, we were sitting in a position where we were doing all of the activities of a CRO. And when we were working on end-to-end clinical trials, so from all the way to the start to the end as the main CRO, we were able to run those trials around 30 to 50% faster than industry benchmarks. So we were sort of at a place now where we had, sort of achieved our first goal as a company, create a platform where we could run clinical trials more efficiently. And then we started raising capital in order for allow us to be able to buy our portfolio of drug assets. And so we raised a Series C in early 2021. We went out and we acquired a portfolio of around 4 drug assets in rheumatology and dermatology, started running trials for those, showing that we were able to achieve the same types of outcomes that we did for our pharma customers on our own drug assets. And then we raised another financing round earlier this year, a $372 million Series D, to allow us to expand the size of that portfolio and also to be able to continue building out our operational capabilities. So maybe moving into, apologies for the colors here being a little bit off. Google Slides to PowerPoint strikes again. So I think, over the last decade, we've been able to build a drug development engine with effectively a single integrated data layer that helps us drive consistency, quality, and efficiency across our clinical trials. And in many ways, this is very differentiated from large pharma and from the CRO industry as a whole, where data tends to be siloized, difficult to access, highly dependent on humans to be able to sort of find where the right data points are, how they apply to various areas that you might be looking into. And this is a real differentiator for us as a sort of pharma company, which has truly been built as a sort of next generation tech ecosystem. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about then how that plays into an AI strategy for a company like ours. We've been building AI tooling for a while now. It all starts with this underlying data layer, right? Where it's all unified, it's all in one place, it's a consistent source of truth across the organization. On top of that, we build models and agents, right, which are trained on the underlying data set. And then importantly, we have an app ecosystem that sits on top of those models and agents. The app ecosystem allows the experts in our company to access the underlying data through the models and agents, have an impact on day-to-day workflows, but very importantly, those experts are interacting with the models and agents through the app ecosystem. So we create a feedback loop where the experts are helping to train those models and agents on a day-to-day basis with their regular interactions with them. As we continue working on clinical trials, the underlying data layer is constantly hydrated with new information coming in from the work that we're doing in various verticals. And as we think about deploying AI across our organization, we tend to think about breaking into 3 separate tiers. We sort of have tier 1, which is AI-driven workflow automation. This is the really low-hanging fruit type stuff, the types of things which, really shouldn't a computer be able to do this, but it hasn't done it until now. An example for that would be adverse event reporting. If you're running a clinical trial and something happens to a patient during that trial which is sort of outside of the range of expected outcomes, so let's say you're running a dermatology trial, you're expecting some rashing, but you have a patient that has a very large rash, far more significant than expected, you'll need to write a report on that and share that with the FDA. The report is going to be based on the patient's health record, everything that's happened to them during the clinical trial, a lot of the specifics related to the drug, the way the trial works itself. These reports can take up to 10 hours to write. Using the AI models that we have in-house, we're actually able to reduce that time to about 1 hour, where the AI takes the bulk of the work and then the expert comes in to be able to QC and to be able to ensure that everything is as it should be. And so we're deploying a lot of that across our organization, right, to help sort of disintermediate a lot of the existing costs. Then we also have sort of like the tier 2 level, which is more AI-supported decision-making. And this is the type of thing where the AI is sort of really acting as a co-pilot for us. So say we're starting up a new clinical trial, and we need to think about patient recruitment, and there's an entire patient recruitment strategy that needs to go into place there. We need to think about what's the patient population, what are the personas of the patients that might be willing and interested in participating in the trial, what are the tactics you should use, sort of various strategies for recruiting, what's the recruiting content that you're going to develop. This is an area where our teams can work with specially trained agents and models to be able to help answer these questions, but it's much more of sort of the AI is contributing to the process as opposed to in the medical rating where it's doing the bulk of the work. Sort of the third area is this sort of idea behind autonomous AI decision-making where the AI is actually just doing a lot of decisions on its own. We're not at that frontier yet. A lot of the work that we're doing in tier 1 and tier 2 will eventually over time build up to a place where the AI can start disintermediating whole areas of the work that's typically done by a human and making those decisions itself. And it's quite an uneven frontier, right? There's going to be certain areas where you could sort of see AI taking over earlier, and then other things that's going to take a much longer period of time. But ultimately, those are the types of things that we're building up to. And so, at Formation, I think we really do have an opportunity to create a sort of a pharma company that has big pharma scale, right? The ability to be able to move a lot of drugs, do it very efficiently, do it much faster, but do it without that large pharma overhead. We've already taken out a lot of the time and we've taken out a lot of the cost, but building up from our existing position in the market, right, the data advantage that we have, we believe that we're going to be able to achieve far greater scale with far less human capital investment along the way. And I think that the real benefit that we're going to see here, in addition to sort of just running a more efficient process, is that we're going to be building a future where patients are going to be able to get those life-saving, life-changing drugs, hopefully in a fraction of the time that currently takes today, and puts us in a position to truly transform healthcare. So it's been absolutely wonderful to share a little bit of our story here with you today, and certainly huge thanks to Jim and the team at Alpha Lab for helping us get this started and allowing us to sort of reach the place that we are today. Be happy to answer any questions that folks may have.